Hello, everyone. Welcome back. I hope you had a lovely spring break. We're here this time to talk about this article called Beyond Technology Skills Toward a Framework for CDL and Pre-Service Technology Education by Watuluk and Kinzer. And lots of food for thought here, especially if you're thinking also about Rancière and Jacques and where their take would be on schoolmasters, if you will. So this is kind of an article about people who want to become teachers, right? And I think it's most of us would agree that aspiring teachers need some kind of technological training. I learn how to use all of these wonderful tools that are out there available to at least some classrooms, right? Uh, so how do you go about that? And the authors, they criticize the traditional model of just as part of your teacher training, you take this one-off course, this sort of standalone course in technology in general. And I suppose in those courses they would go over PowerPoint, maybe magic boards, tablets. Maybe it sounds like some of them do blogs, that sort of thing. But it's kind of just this generic technology course that focuses on skills. Right? So how do you use PowerPoint? Well, take this course. We'll show you how to, how to do this, how to make the transitions. Photoshop. You get the picture, right? So the problem with that kind of course for them, I think for us probably as well, is if you're just focused on sort of the mechanics of how to do these things, you're not thinking more about the why. So what? Why would you even use PowerPoint in your classroom? What is that going to do for you? What's that going to do for your students? It's not enough just to know how to use it. We also want to know how to use it effectively, whether or not you should use it. And that's just PowerPoint. You could do the same for any kind of technology that you'd like to introduce to your classroom, right? There should be some kind of critical awareness of it. And this DPAC framework for them seems to do a lot of the work, but they feel like it's missing that critical component. So, in case you don't remember this, the TPAC stands for Technological, Pedagogical, and Content Knowledge Framework. So we want to delve a little bit more into this, see what we think about it. So here's a couple other criticisms of the traditional framework, the one-size-fits-all approach. So they say much pre-service education technology focuses overly on the use of technology as a tool for digital creation. So I'm sure you've seen this before, maybe in your classes that you're teaching or taking. You might feel like you're spending a little too much time focused on the tool part of this. How do you use the tool? How do you use this tool? And it's not so clear as to why this tool is necessary. We see this. I think about this sometimes. I had this idea I wanted to use in my classes, Adobe Flash, back when that was a big thing. And I thought it'd be pretty cool if students could use Adobe Flash to create these sort of web videos. This was sort of before YouTube was a big deal. And I saw a lot of potential there for pretty interesting things that the students could create with Flash, sort of interactive animation kind of deals. But the problem was that Adobe Flash it had a big learning curve to it, and it took a long time, a lot of class time to teach basically just how do you even make a triangle move around the screen. That might be a whole class period just on that. And the same thing with Photoshop and some of these other tools. In other words, there's a lot of very powerful tools out there. And they have a lot of interesting possibilities, but the problem is you have to spend so much time in your class teaching people how to use it or learning it yourself that it seems to be too big of a trade-off, right? Not a very good trade-off. So you need to, for that, I think the more complex, the more time you're going to have to spend teaching the tool, the bigger the bigger the reward needs to be, right? So you have to be able to justify that. And I didn't feel like Adobe Flash was quite cutting it at the time. On the other hand, blogs, wikis, sorts of technologies I use in this course, I feel like they're simple enough. It doesn't really require that huge of an investment, and it's pretty clear, why you would use it, right? So anyway, that's the first part of their criticism. Second part, they say it fails to incorporate an understanding of the uses within participatory culture, and not in ways that result in critical analysis of content or alignment with pedagogy. So again, there's this idea of, well, you should use blogs in your class. Why? Because blogs are cool. Not a lot of training about. So what if you know how to set up a WordPress account? If you don't have an understanding of what is a blog, should I just write an essay in the blog, or I'll talk more about this in a second. But I definitely agree with this. And it's definitely not enough. If you're not thinking about your class and what you're trying to teach, and you're just trying to plug a random piece of technology in there, it doesn't really work very well. And I think we would all agree with that. This one-size-fits-all approach not making sense. This is one of the problems I have with D2L, by the way, is that a lot of it is great for certain kinds of courses. There's a lot of functionality there, for example, for mathematics classes, have all these special symbols, and you can put formulas into it pretty effectively and all of this kind of thing. So it might be great for that, but not so great for my purposes, because one of the things I really focus on is peer reviews, revision, and it's a big burdensome process from that point of view. All right, so what do they want to add to this DPAC framework? So a lot of you, well, a lot. I was reading the nuggets that are up there now. There's one from Seth and Jennifer, so I was reading those. And I think it was Seth that said he liked this. He liked that they defined CDL. So they say they're using this term because they want to de-emphasize the can't talk today. De-emphasize technology skills and emphasize the critical understanding of and engagement with functional technology skills within the broader context of technology use. So that sounds great. So we don't want to just, for example, teach you how to use Photoshop. That's not enough. We also want to think about your subject, your content area. So if you're a math teacher, how much you use it versus an English. Would your English professor even use Photoshop? Well, maybe, but we want to think about that. And we want to have a critical understanding of it, right? But they want to distance themselves from what I would call critical pedagogy. They talked about this, so they seem to appreciate this position, but they say they're not interested in uncovering power inequality and social injustice in kind of a neo-Marxist sense. What they do want to do, though, is focus on the self-reflective understanding of position and practices within a digital society. Now, how you separate those two things, I'm not quite clear on that, but I suppose you could just not talk about it as much. Okay, so maybe I should stop here. So what do you think so far about this? Do you think they're on to something? I don't know how many of you have taken these sort of technology courses, but do you feel like focusing too much on just the functional skills part of it is insufficient, and that you need some other component? Okay, so we want to move here into this CDL part of this. And I think this first sentence kind of gets at what they're getting at, right? So technologies are not value-neutral objects. Technology and its uses are both shaped by social and societal forces and synergistically shape how we interact with and make meaning in the world. And they give a couple of brief examples. Cuneiform, that was one. They talked about the role of smartphones, I suppose, and Twitter, and these, what do they call that? The Arab Spring. I don't know if they mentioned that specifically, but I think they talked about Occupy Wall Street and how they were using these technologies. But this stuff right here is what really gets me, really piques my interest. I love this stuff. There's a book, one of the classics is Walter J. Ong's Orality and Literacy. And he talks in that book about, Ong in that book talks about how when writing was introduced, it was more than just kind of here's a cool new technology. He said it actually changed the way people think, that all these sort of new ways of thinking were opened up by writing, and sort of had this huge impact to the point where a literate society is fundamentally different than an oral society. So anyway, I just find that stuff just hopelessly fascinating. I could think about it all day. And that's just writing. You think about computers and the internet. So they're definitely right here. They're not value neutral, of course. Even the pencil, people often say, well, pencil's a very, they like to say the pencil's like this very simple alternative to a computer, and not even appreciating all the technology that it takes to make a pencil. Thoreau, for example, made his fortune, right, with this pencil business. And I like to point that out. But anyway, it's very valuable to think about why are we using this technology? Why is the technology the way that it is? Why are we interacting with it in this way? Is it just purely practical, pragmatic considerations, or are there these larger forces at work? And Cynthia Self has a wonderful essay called The Politics of the Interface. And she talks in there about, she makes some points in there about the Microsoft Office, for example, and it has all these sort of office metaphors, file cabinets, and manila folders, and so on. And that's not a coincidence, right? That's sort of showing you that sort of corporate influence at work behind that interface. It could have been radically different. Could have been a kitchen metaphor instead of an office metaphor. Try to wrap your head around that. So I think that's very true, and I think these authors are right too. I want to bring in these points they make on page 141. So they say we shouldn't just ask students to use blogs to reproduce traditional three-part essays rather than connect with others. And so this is a problem I wanted to delve into a little deeper. So a lot of the times what happens is, the example I think about is our wikis. Remember when wikis first started to come onto the scene, there were a lot of teachers that were interested in using wikis in their classrooms, right? So what would happen is they would say, okay, we're going to use wikis in this class, and this is how we're going to do it. So every student will have a wiki page, and they'll write their essay in the wiki, and then they'll post it on the web. Well, the problem was that the people would come in there and edit their wiki, right? And they didn't like that. So they say, okay, what we need here is a password protection on the wiki so that nobody but you will be able to edit that wiki. And people seem to kind of agree with this, but others in the class were saying, well, okay, but doesn't that kind of defeat the whole point of a wiki, right? Isn't the point is the people that come to read the page can edit the page? If you want to lock it down, how is that even a wiki? It's like you don't really understand how Wikipedia works and how people are using wikis and why anybody would choose a wiki. If you just want to do this three-part essay, there's other tools. For example, Microsoft Word. Why are you even using this? And same thing with blogs. If you're going to lock the comment section out where nobody can comment on a blog, and you're going to have it private so only the student can see the blog, how is this even you sort of get what I'm saying there, right? It's not really showing an understanding of the context of these things. It's just, well, I heard the word blog, I think it's cool. I want to be able to say I'm using blogs in my class, even though you're not really using them in the way that anyone else would use them, right? And so they say that's kind of bad, and I agree with this. If I were, for example, had the idea to use Pinterest in my class, I think it would be kind of important to know how other people really use Pinterest. Why is this even a thing? Before I went and tried to graft it onto my syllabus somehow. They say it's also bad if the only thing you're worried about is, well, do my students know how to create a Facebook profile? Do they know what buttons to push, right, to make this happen? Same thing with a blog. I think the Facebook example is really a good example here because, my goodness, the trouble students could get into. Anything about LinkedIn or any of these things, if you just say, here's how to do it, now go do it, without giving them any sort of background. Maybe they know about sort of the dangers they could get into with Facebook, all the privacy concerns and whatnot. The subject comes up a lot if you go to these computers and writing conferences. Some teachers, I went to some of these conferences and or panels, and the teachers were saying, well, all my students are on Facebook already, so it works really great for my class because I can communicate with students over Facebook, right? And I can give them instructions on their assignments, and they can post their reading responses on Facebook and so on. And I just, I really did not like that notion at all. It kind of bothered me that it almost felt like the teachers are kind of invading the students' social space. And yes, there's ways you can sort of wall things out in Facebook, but I thought that wasn't really showing a very good understanding. Uh, there are sort of educational alternatives to Facebook, kind of work like Facebook. Teacher book, I think, is one. Maybe I'm just making that up. But anyway, I was troubled by that. Definitely didn't see a lot of critical awareness of the whole. Not to mention that, of course, Facebook's a corporation. They're trying to make a profit. They're selling all this access to all this data. I mean, it's very troublesome. But then they say there's something even worse than that. It's when you just ignore the fact they talk about the digital divide. The traditional digital divide is just maybe the student is so poor he or she doesn't have the internet at home, maybe no computers, no smartphone. So what do you do about that? This has always been a problem for tech people, because what do you do? Okay, so you just want to say nobody can use the technology because some person can't afford it. That's not a very good solution. Maybe there's a library, computer lab they can go to instead. The way I try to work with this around this problem is to find free tools. So instead of saying, well, okay, you need to have Photoshop to participate in my class, and by the way, that's going to cost $600. Or we can just use, what is it, Paint.net, which is free, does everything we really need it to do. But then they talked about this second digital divide, which again kind of tying back into what they were saying before, right? So just because just because you have the internet at home and you can create a Facebook page, if maybe you're coming here from another country, you never heard of Facebook before, don't know what it is, you don't have that, I guess you'd call it practice. You don't really know the right way, if you will, to use Facebook. And so that's kind of another divide, I guess. I was also wondering, with this, if we could bring gender into this. I was thinking about all this talk about women in games, for example, playing the games as well as making the games. And there's a lot of privilege practice issues I think you could bring up with that. It's kind of a can of worms, I suppose. But anyway, let me just stop here and get your take on this. Do you think that these problems are real and serious and that we should consider them? Okay, so then we get into some of their solutions. So what would they do with their teacher ed pre-service class? And they give us some examples. I think these are pretty good examples, right? So they talked about this first one where you blog, your technobiography, sort of your technological story, I suppose. And then they would make this video mashup, post it to YouTube, use comments, revise it, post it back up to YouTube. So I like this idea because it kind of combines the two, right? So you're learning how to use a blog, you're learning how to make a video, but you're not just posting it to YouTube and leaving it. You're actually using those comments to revise it. So it does. They talked about, they use the word authentic a lot in this article. So this does sound a lot more authentic to me, like you're actually using these blogs and videos the way that a real person would, not just a simulation. So I like that. They also talked about this comic life tool. So you could make a little comic book. I guess sort of similar practice. They've also got blogs in there for discussion and reflection. I'm not quite sure as much about number 2 here. I'm not real familiar with how people are using Comic Life. Are they using it for purposes like this? I'm just not really sure. Not too familiar with that program or how people are using it. But anyway, I'll just stop again here. What do you think about these activities? Do you think these do you think these address all those issues that these authors raised about the other ones? And I think that will do it for now. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed this, and I'll see you soon with the next article.